Okay, and we should be live, I understand. Great. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Accessibility in the Public Sector Statistics, Trends and Tips panel webinar. I'm going to go and jump straight in and start with a brief agenda. Today's session will be divided into 4 parts, beginning with an introduction, which is what I'm doing now. We'll then be given a brief overview of the latest Silktide Accessibility Index before moving on to a panel discussion where we'll be reflecting what we've learned and discussing accessibility in local government in general. And finally, we'll finish up with a 15-minute Q&A. So that was a very brief agenda, but here we go. Next slide. If you'd like to join in the conversation, please do so on Twitter. We've got the handles of the organizations involved in the panel here, so please do feel free to include them in any tweets, should you feel so inclined. We will be sharing this recording after, so yeah, don't worry if you miss bits and pieces. And please feel free to chat in the chat window to the right of your screen, and do pop down any questions you might have. We have team members monitoring the chats, so we should be able to weave some input or any questions into the discussion. Okay. Briefly going to introduce the panel to begin with. I'm Austin, I'm the facilitator, but we have Lee Percox, who is head of product at Silktide, who will start us off with a quick overview of the Accessibility Index in just a minute. Hi there, Lee.
Hi, everybody.
We have Anne Jones, who is the web officer at Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council, which is a council that consistently ranks highly in the index. Anne has dialed in, which is why you can't see her video, but you should be able to hear her, and you can see her picture there. So great to have you with us, Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do have her online, great. And from Jadu, we have Luke Towers, who is a software test engineer, and Paul Johnson, who is a content strategist and our training manager. If you've ever attended our accessibility sessions before, you may well recognize Paul. So thank you for joining us, both of you.
Hi, everyone.
Great. So let's begin. The Silktide Accessibility Index is a league table ranking UK public sector websites. It highlights successes along with areas for improvement. Towards the end of each month, its automated platform tests each website in a list maintained by Silktide and Soccertim, and the results are published at the beginning of the following month. September was a big month in public sector accessibility. As of the 23rd, all public bodies are now expected to conform to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1. Lee is going to start off by giving us a brief overview of the latest index, along with the most common accessibility issues that Silktide is seeing at the moment. So I will hand over to you now, Lee.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I will just pop on to take over my screen a second. Austin, can you just let me know when you can see my screen?
Sure, I think it's just loading at the moment. Takes a couple of seconds. There we go, I can see it.
There we go, perfect, excellent, right. Just before I actually run through the current index results for this month and a trend over time since we started the index, I just wanted to recap very quickly on some of the key points to the accessibility law. I know I'm certain a lot of you are sat there thinking, oh, we're repeating this again. It's all I've heard for the last year. But there may be 1 or 2 points here that you might not be aware of, or has fallen a little bit down the pile, with obviously public-facing websites needing to be accessible. So, as a quick recap, so that's public sector websites must comply with WCAG 2.1 AA, and that actually includes new intranets and extranets. And the government defined new as published after the 23rd of September 2019. So we need to keep that in mind, that it's not just about our public-facing websites. We also need to be working on our intranets and extranets if you have commissioned any new work after that particular date. Obviously, if we want to, have a stretch goal and beat that, let's go and do some of our old content. But we also are aware of time, budgets, and there's a lot involved in terms of trying to do that. The next key point is mobile applications also need to be accessible by the 23rd of June next year. And that is one that I know definitely falls quite low to the pile. When I'm talking to our customers quite a bit, that's one they're not actually aware of. So if your council or university has commissioned mobile applications, we need to ensure that they're accessible as well. PDFs, they also, if they've been created after the 23rd of September 2018, they must be accessible. Now, there are caveats to each one of these. So I know in certain areas there's law that prevents you need to do that, but generally speaking, PDFs after that date need to be accessible. And a fun fact on that, the average that we've seen in Silktide across all of our public sector customers have around 20,000 PDFs per organization. And even if you were an accessibility expert spending a few minutes on each PDF to make them accessible, we can already see there's a lot of time that would need to be spent into to make them accessible. So this is one that we need to look at and really identify a great way or an effective way to try to make our content accessible and make sure we focus in the correct areas. And the final one, which I know that Austin and the team are going to touch on accessibility statements later, but I just want to recap that public sector websites really should be displaying an accessibility statement. This is a requirement, and it's also a really good thing to do to show your commitment in terms of where we're heading as organizations for accessibility, letting people know about the parts that aren't necessarily accessible, because you're never going to have every single one of your 30,000, 40,000 page web estate have every single page accessible. There's always going to be some accidents or things that you haven't realized. And as long as we've proven, obviously, we are working on that, then that's great. And I think the accessibility statement has an important role to play in that. Now, the reason I wanted to recap on those is because that fits in perfectly with the Silktide index, as Austin introduced wonderfully for us. The Silktide index will scan your public-facing websites. We'll take the first 125 pages and 125 PDFs we find to kind of benchmark against all of the organizations within that industry. Now, these scores are from 0 to 100, and I just want to clarify that before I start talking numbers. But if we look at the left-hand side for the trend since February, when we started collecting these results, we can clearly see a nice, a line going up that we want to be seen, right? This is a positive correlation here. And I've only done this across 3 sectors. So universities, which is the pinkish line, councils, blue line, and the NHS trusts, which I guess that's turquoise. People can probably comment in the chat about how wrong I am on those colors. Anyway, what we can see here, it is positive. It's heading in the correct direction. Councils alone, for a score for an entire section, an entire segment, so all of councils, has raised by 13.5 score in our platform, which is huge considering that's all the way back in February. And when you think some councils will obviously do more than others, so as a spread, 13.5, that is great. Universities have increased by 8.6 and NHS trusts by 12. So we can see this is great. This is positive. We're heading in the correct direction. But there's 2 things I want to draw that I'll take from these results, right? So the first one is we can actually see the average score for a council, if we take that, is around 68 in our system. So what that means is, as an average, there are fundamental single A and double A issues still within that sector, right? So we need to be working on that. For anyone that doesn't know, the single A, we really must be doing this to have a baseline of accessibility for websites. So we've clearly got more work still to do there. But what I can acknowledge is this is fantastic work. This is great, what we want to be seen as a trend. So congratulations for everybody that has done some really great work within their councils. I know when I speak to my customers in my councils that I look after, they're working incredibly hard on such tight budgets, tight time frames, and well done to you all. So that's one takeaway. The other one is I can see here when the law actually came into place, which anyone that can see that purple line in September, we can actually see that's where the biggest jump in score increase took place across all the 3 sectors that I've included here, right? So there's 2 challenges to that. It's either one, people realize maybe a little late to the game and then have done something and there's been a great bump there, or on the more positive side, everybody's timed their new public facing websites and assets to land at a great time. So I don't care how it came about, but there is a good jump there, and congratulations. But what I want to hopefully not continue to see is the following month after that, the ascent, not necessarily as much with councils, but especially for universities and NHS trusts, dropped off a little bit. So I'm hoping that's just kind of, we've all had a huge push and we've hit for our councils to get things into place for for the law to come into effect, or the directive. And I'm just hoping that then, as we look at this data in the next few months, we can see that that line continues to increase, because we want to be pushing into the 70s, and hopefully, as a stretch goal, let's try and work over the next year or two to get into the 80s, because if we improve accessibility for our constituents, or for your constituents, shall we say, that's just huge. And I'll show some of the common issues, shall we say, that we are seeing in the index that are constantly coming up. And I want to actually give you some real world examples of these issues, so I can show you how they affect people. So I'll only be another 5 minutes, but let me run through this. So 3 things that we're seeing a lot on the index is websites are missing skip to content links in a lot of areas. In some instances, they're missing completely off the entire website. In other instances, they've only prioritized areas such as home pages and missed out a lot of other content. And as we can see here in the brackets, that's nearly 58% of council websites are missing that skip to content link. So I'll show you a real world example of that in a moment as to why that's something we really want to be adding there, and how easy it is to actually add. The next one is using the same link text for different destinations. So what you can actually see here is 92% of councils have areas such as links that say learn more or read more, or you have two links on the page for contact, but they go to completely different areas. These are not helpful if you're using assistive technology, and I want to explain again as to why. And the final one is ensuring controls change appearance when they are selected. So think of that as tabbed browsing. So using your tab key on the website to navigate through it, and hopefully seeing a blue focus come around that. 56% of council websites don't have them. So let me show you some of these actual issues. So for the missing skip to content, as I was saying, 58% miss this. You can see here, if I hit my tab key now, you'll see in this top left-hand corner on Silktide's website, we get this skip to content that comes up, right? If I was to click that, the next time I hit the tab key, I'll actually be down here where I've actually skipped, if anyone can see this, I've skipped all of this navigation up here. I haven't had to go through all of that. And I've been able to come down here into the main body of the content, which is ideal. Now, if I hadn't done that, and imagine this skipped content link wasn't here, what would have to happen is I'd have to go through every single one of these items to try to get to the area of the page I actually want to, I've come to read your blog because I want to read the content. I've not come to read your blog because I want to go through every single item in your navigation bar. So that was one example with my using the tab key. But if I was actually to load the Silktide screen reader a moment, which the screen reader was designed for people that don't use screen readers to try and give them a little bit of an idea how it works. If I was to use the screen reader, the first thing I get to see is skipped main content, which is fantastic. And if I click on that, I will see the heading or the main content. But again, if I don't, and I want it to read out the next items, I'll see the Silktide logo. I'll see solutions, I'll see industries, I'll see resources, and I don't want to have to be seeing that. So for something as simple as adding that skipped content link, it can really transform the way that people may navigate your web page. Okay. So the second one, and apologies if anybody loves shopping at Avon. I've tried to not, we don't want to shame any councils or anyone here, so I've used an impartial party on this. We can see that people are using the same link text for different destinations. And again, if you can see here, we've got shop now, shop now, and shop now. Now, if I'm visually sighted and I'm looking at that, I can see I want to shop now for Pretty Perfect Bubble Bath or Avon Charm Fragrance, which is great. But now imagine I couldn't visually see your page. All I may actually end up seeing is shop now, and shop now. But what am I actually shopping now for, right? Examples of, and by no means do I claim that these are perfect alternative text. This is a massive debate that could go on for a long period of time. But what we can't argue is this is so much more helpful if you were not able to see, but you were hearing, say, a screen reader read this out to you. It's much better to hear shop now for Pretty Perfect Bubble Bath, or shop now for Avon Charm Fragrances, or shop now for, I wouldn't even know how to say that. The point being, as people use the screen reader, some people may go element by element, but I know personally when I use a screen reader, I prefer to go via links or via headings, And if I will navigate via links, all I will see is shop now, shop now, and shop now. So we really should be getting either the web page designed differently, so it can explain where you're shopping now, or using ARIA, if no one's heard of that, which think of that as where HTML mocks up a web page, think of ARIA as kind of the accessibility markup is how I like to think of it for a page. And you can tell using ARIA to only show the more descriptive version for people using assistive technology. Okay, so there are ways if people push back and say, oh, it's going to harm the visual appeal of the page, we can still do this without harming the visual appeal. So again, another very simple improvement to the page, but it transforms the way people using assistive technology may digest your content. And as we can see, 92% of the council websites we analysed in that 125 pages and 125 PDF sample were falling foul to this issue. Now, finally, and then I will stop talking, is the tabbed browsing that I spoke about. So people aren't ensuring controls actually change appearance when they're selected. And what I mean by a control is think of a link or a button on the website. So as I hit that tab key, I should be able to see that highlight. And I'll give you an example by showing you how we believe it should be done correctly, although I must add in there that I am slightly biased considering I helped build this website. But again, as I hit the tab, you can see there's a blue outline or something that distinctly tells me every time I'm hitting that tab key where I am on the page. So at any point, if I wanted to click on a particular piece of content, let's say government, I can click on that. And again, I can carry on and I know exactly where I am on this page. That's great. That's what we want. But now if I go to an incorrect version, which again, Silktide did actually build this website. It's our dummy test site. I think our testers just love wine or burgers, one or the other. But if I'm actually hitting the tab key at the moment, and can anyone actually tell me where I am on this page as I'm tabbing through? I mean, that is rhetorical because nobody's got their microphone on, but in general, you can't see where I am on this page. And that proves my point. The browser by default will always show that blue outline around any control. So if it doesn't, you've actually overridden the default behavior of a browser. And it probably wasn't intentional, but now you've stopped anybody trying to use a keyboard being able to navigate your website. And while some people may say, well, how often do people using keyboards really navigate a website? But you'd be surprised about how many actually do that. From people with permanent disabilities, you maybe have tremors and can't control a mouse or a trackpad, they may have to do it. Or you may have people with a temporary disability, maybe they've sprained their arm, or they're diabetic maybe, and they've had a low drop and can't use your mouse now, so they would use it. And finally, depending on which situation you're in, I naturally, if I'm on a form control, for example, where I'm trying to fill in your multi-stage form, I will always navigate your form by a keyboard. That's my personal preference. But by you simply not adding that focus state, I no longer can do that, which not only gives me a bad perception of your website, but also will alienate certain users from being able to physically use it. So again, something very simple that we just need to educate and make sure our team are aware of, so we don't override that. It can really transform it for certain users that will be coming on and using your website. So that is my section, but as a summary, the index results are improving across the entire public sector. There is some phenomenal work that is being done around accessibility, and it really makes me happy to see that. There are just some common issues that are still cropping up time and time again. And with just a small amount of education and time, we can really transform those pages for users of assistive technology. So thank you very much, and back over to Austin.
Thank you very much for that, Lee. Much appreciated. So I'd like to begin the panel section of this webinar by getting reflections on what Lee has shared there. I guess a good place to start would be asking whether there are any surprises or whether these issues are fairly familiar. Is there anybody that would like to get us started on that one?
Could add something in about the same link text going to different destinations. We found it can be quite difficult to manage that when you've got the content that's automatically generated. So You could have, for example, on our site, a list of downloads for our planning policy team, and they've been pulled in from different downloads, but they're published in one page. So you might end up getting the same link text going to a different destination. So the advice we give is try to avoid generic names, and so things like council report or monitoring report, and try and include a place name if that's appropriate to make these names more unique, so that if they do get pulled into one page with lots of content, the linked text will still be unique, if that makes sense.
Yes, from my side, that makes a lot of sense. I also think what you can do for a lot of that stuff, because I know sometimes you'll have it linked to different pages because of the ways that your URLs may work, but the actual page themselves, itself may be the same content. So as long as we're ensuring that we have the correct tags to notify which one's the canonical, which one's meant to be the main page, then I think that's less of an issue, because ultimately, even if it's slightly different link text, you are still ending up at the same place. I think the bigger issue is when you're doing things such as I was showing with shopping, for example, or blog items, that kind of stuff, when you're trying to look into learning more or reading more about certain items, unless we're actually explaining what that is, as you explained, then people just aren't going to know what they're looking at.
Great point. Any other reflections from the panel and on Lee's presentation there? Any initial reactions?
I think it'd be very annoying if you didn't have skip to content, because obviously then all the menus and content were repeated on every page you went to. So I think that'd be very irritating for people.
At Hinckley and Bosworth, did you run into any of those issues that I'd highlighted it, but or have you not felt those previously?
I think probably the one we looked into was the focus issue, making sure the focus state was different. Is it to the hover state?
Yeah.
So that if you hover over something with the mouse, it needs to look different to when you're tabbing through with the keyboard. So we've certainly looked at focus state over the last few years. And maybe also, like I said before, same link to different destinations. We've been caught out with that, so we try to make names quite unique and avoid generic names where possible. But I mean, obviously, like you said, where we sometimes have an alternative link to the same page, so we could have a friendly URL as well as the standard URL. So that's two different URLs, but they're actually going to the same page, so we're kind of less worried about that.
Okay, perfect. I think the only part of that I'd point out maybe was sorry, that I'm trying to remember now. That first part that you mentioned again. If could you just repeat that part? I didn't quite hear it.
Sorry, which part was that?
It was just the opening part. Yeah, sorry, that was. I think it was the. To be honest, I've lost what was said. I don't know if anyone can remember that first part, but I'll pass.
I think one thing that jumped out at me, as an aside, I think seeing the mock-up site that Lee showed with the shop now links was, I guess, just coming back to the fact that a lot of this stuff really focuses on, I guess, the technical side of accessibility in terms of what's included in templates and things like that, whereas content plays a huge role in it as well. And the thing that jumped out at me about those shop now links was that they were in all caps, and some screen readers will treat all caps as acronyms. So rather than reading out shop now, they'll read out SHOPNOW, depending on how they're encoded in the background. But I think just generally in these conversations, I think that the content element of accessibility tends to get missed a lot of the time, in terms of how you can support users with different accessibility needs, in terms of the way that you actually write and present your content as well.
No, definitely.
Yeah, and I guess one of the biggest issues that always gets brought up but hasn't so far is the looming spectre of the PDFs, which I know are always a hot topic. And I think I've seen in the chat, I've only glanced at it at the moment because I've been looking at the running order, but I think it's come up, and we've got some questions at the end. But that's always going to be a concern, right? And I know it's a question that's been asked many times before, but how best to tackle PDFs? I'm going to throw that one out there and see what kind of response I get.
I'll probably say from the side, just from the data that we have seen, and then I'd especially be interested to hear how everyone else has actually tackled these, especially Anne at Hinckley, actually, boots on the ground, shall we call it. But we saw the numbers that I mentioned, around 20,000 PDFs on average. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're the ones that are produced after September 2018, but there's still a large amount of them. And I think that by their very nature, everyone probably already knows that they're a fundamentally inaccessible format. You can do things to make them better, but the experience is never going to be amazing. You try loading up PDFs on your mobile phone, and it's just not going to be a great experience. And naturally, you have to put an incredible amount of work in to truly try to make them as accessible as they can be. But actually trying to provide alternative content, such as a HTML-based page, obviously, it's just a given. The improvement to accessibility and SEO, because people forget, if it's in a PDF, it's also, it's pretty much impossible to truly index that content, which means you're now also missing out the searchability side of it for people trying to search for queries and different intents in Google to try and identify these pages. You've completely missed that. And isn't one of the biggest things that we've got to do is try and get that content into a way to allow the most amount of people to see, hear, and consume them. So my answer to that is trying to provide HTML-based pages. But what we've got to do, and I think the onus in a lot of areas, is on both education, so educating your team on all of the different intricacies and the ins and outs of rules of how to make more accessible PDFs in Word, or how to do the same in Adobe Acrobat, but also on the developers and the CMS providers to work to create not convenient templates that make it fast and easy to drop in well-designed, what originally would have been PDFs, but are now well-designed HTML pages where images can easily be dropped in, titles can be dropped in, the text can be dropped in. I think that something like 94%, or it was a strange number of PDFs that we had scanned, were pretty much just plain text PDFs with the odd one or two graphic, which there isn't really any reason, except for the legal requirements in some aspects, why they can't be put into HTML content quite easily. But if we're putting friction in place that makes it slower for people to create this content, you're going to get a lot more pushback, and people will naturally fall back to PDFs. For the other 6%, where they're much more, a visual appeal, because obviously PDFs are originally for print media, that's where it gets more difficult, and it's on the development teams and graphic designers and anyone else that you have at your disposal to try to make it easy so you can avoid that content. The simple answer was ideally you shouldn't be using it. I can still see a lot of areas, including even at Silktide, we tell people don't use them, and still we find the marketing team, which I go and shout at quite regularly, are putting these together. And half the time the reason why is, we don't have time, or how else could I do this? And it's, if we'd sat and educated them, or made our platforms, such as our website, easier for them to grab templates to throw it in, it would have helped us reduce the number of PDFs making it onto the website. So that's my side.
I think in terms of PDFs as well, I think there's a tendency for organizations to publish PDFs because they have them, as opposed to trying to look at why are we publishing that as a PDF, and looking at the best way of publishing that information. So for example, quite often you'll find you'll have hundreds of PDFs that are literally leaflets that have been uploaded to a website, where the information's actually already there on other web pages as well. So it's causing duplication and publishing the content in a sort of secondary form that's not accessible. So in instances like that, it's thinking, well, do we actually need the PDF at all? Because the information's sitting over here on a web page. And equally, it's looking at those PDFs and determining if to, as we said, to create them as a web page. I've come across some organizations now that are saying that actually it's easier for them to publish the content as a web page because of the new overheads in terms of trying to make PDFs accessible. And certainly in my experience, that one question of saying, is this the right format to publish the content in, is a really good starting point. Particularly if it's a single page PDF that's just a block of text, then why not just put it on a web page?
I think the GDS, they had a good a page on this as well that we looked at, where they actually shown some good examples of how you can try to create content without having to use PDFs. So particular kind of templates similar to what I was explaining. Maybe you can have, the chapters or the parts down the left-hand side in the navigation, and then the content on the right-hand side, and ways where you can drop in images. So that could be good content to take a look at as well.
Yeah, I sort of agree with what Paul was saying really as well. Often people just want it on the site when the information's already in a web page, and at Hinckley we always try to get content in a web page first before content's added as a Word document or as a PDF document. But we do also now have a promotional template which has helped, so we can have a highly designed web page, which means we don't have to put a PDF on if somebody wants something a bit more designed than a standard web page. That's helped us as well.
What are you hearing a lot, Anne, in terms of, so you mentioned that you're creating a HTML page naturally first, but in some instances people are still wanting the PDFs on the website. Did they tend to give a reason as to why they want those PDFs on there?
It's often because they think people want to print it off. I mean, obviously you can still print a web page, but we try not to put them on. If we have to put them on, then they do need to be accessible, and there's been a lot of hard work there, but we do try and encourage web pages wherever possible.
And
to print.
And to ask, it would be good to get your thoughts on from a sort of practical standpoint, because when we've had webinars before, and it's been mentioned that when we want to make sure that all PDFs are accessible and whatnot, it's just a case of just doing it and just making the time and stuff. And sometimes when there's thousands of PDFs and whatnot, and going back and fixing some, and I know there's the idea that if they're before a certain date, if you can prove there's like too much of a burden to go back, and some of those might have ancient maps that just can't be converted for whatever reason, you don't need to do those. But how is it a case of getting buy-in internally to do that time? Because some people, it's going to take up to 5 minutes, right, to make a PDF accessible. How have you approached that?
We got our senior management team to agree our approach, and that was back in December last year, and that really helped us. So it was our approach to comply with new legislation.
Right, yeah.
This meant that any document that went on the site then had to be accessible, because before people thought it was probably just the web team being a bit fussy, we had to have it like this. Whereas I think we went sort of to the top of the organisation, and they sort of approved our approach, and that's really helped us. We've carried out training showing people how to do it. We help people do it. It is quite time consuming, and we've got quite a few PDFs, but we are getting the number down.
I think that just to add on to that, so it's, I'm not trying to plug our product there, but we for one of our future releases, the team been working recently on creating like a rule-based system. So if you get a certain issue, it tells you exactly how in Acrobat and Word, how you can go in and fix them. But what we actually found is, whilst we were putting those rules together, it wasn't even just a case of are you using Word or are you using Acrobat. Each more or less individual yeared version of Word, and same for Acrobat, had and even operating systems. So the Windows-based version compared to the Mac version, all the options were so different. So depending on exactly which one you're using, so how are we even, if we're trying to educate people on how to perfectly make them accessible, how do you really do that when there's so many different ways to do it, and there's so much room for failure? As we learned whilst we were trying to do that honestly, 5 minutes when I mentioned that was from if you've got a pro that already pretty much knows how to make these things accessible. It would be far more than that for the average person going in and trying to make these PDFs accessible.
Yes, certainly more than 5 minutes, definitely. I mean, it depends on the PDF, doesn't it, like you said, and how it's created. But some could take half an hour, some could take over an hour, some might even take 2 hours. It depends on how long it is, how many pages, how many errors. And also, like you say, probably the knowledge level of the person doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we've got we mentioned the spike in activity around the deadline period and people getting more on board with this stuff. And obviously, Anne comes is joining us from a council that is very aware of this stuff and what needs to be done, accessibility. Another question to throw out there, because I wanted to ask it because we've asked it a few times before, and I want to get the reaction based on where we were, say, a year ago, is whether the panel thinks, councils in general or local government in general is doing enough right now to meet these accessibility standards, or if they're able to do enough. And if they're not, then perhaps what are the barriers at the moment? Is there anything preventing people? obstacles that are just too big to sort of overcome? It may not be, but I wanted to chuck that out there because I have got some comparisons to previous webinars, and it'd be quite interesting to see what people think.
So one barrier could be the third-party applications.
Yes.
We are using Silktide to monitor third-party applications to see where there are issues, and we are publishing that in our website and linking it to our accessibility statement. And we're also now adding a clause into new contracts so that software and sites have to comply with WCAG 2.1 AA. And if they don't, and the site gets audited, then the supplier needs to correct that. So we are sort of going down that route as well, because that is a little bit out of our control, third-party sites.
That's really interesting because it was mentioned, and sorry to interrupt you there, Paul, but on a previous webinar that we did around the Jadu Academy, it was quite a hot topic, and people were discussing how you can hold third parties to account, for example. And there was one example of a supplier that wanted a hell of a lot of money to make the changes that were required, and there was a discussion about, well, how do you approach that? And by what you just mentioned there, it sounds like it's sort of the accessibility statement is enough there that it might be a sort of incentive by naming them, but without going and public shaming, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting.
Yeah. I think it's been really.
Sorry,
Anne, go on.
No, I was just going to say it's helpful for the end user, that's all, if they can see potential issues.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think it's really interesting that, because the conversation about third-party solutions and accessibility has been going on for a long time. I think what I think is really great about WCAG 2.1 is that it's really shone a light on accessibility again. Because it's actually been a thing for 20 years that your website should be accessible. You should be able to use them irrespective of your personal circumstances. And I know I've been to several conferences and things in the past, going way back, where people have talked about third parties and the fact that it's difficult to manage third parties and to ensure that their solutions are accessible. What I think's possibly slightly hard is that WCAG 2.1's changed where the responsibility lies slightly, in that it now puts the responsibility on the organization to use a third-party solution that is accessible, as opposed to putting the onus on the third parties to actually make them accessible themselves. So if you're using a third-party solution that isn't accessible in the WCAG 2.1 guidelines, that's not the problem with the third party. It's the issue for the organization using it, which has changed slightly, I think.
I think that as well, just to add on to that, from things that we see from our side, is it's not even just the regular things such as maps. It's everything from even the cookie banner widgets that people bring onto their site to comply with GDPR. That they bring them amongst that they have to, but there aren't that many accessible cookie banners out there. The most used ones are inaccessible naturally, in terms of you focus states that don't work on that, or they take over your screen so much that if I'm using assistive technology, and I naturally in my job have to use screen readers quite a lot, it actually frustrates me that the cookie banner comes up first, and I've got to be dealing with the cookie banner before I can read the content. And I'm not necessarily a perfect pro yet at screen readers, so it does take me a bit longer than, say, most people maybe would be able to work with them. But it's just such an inconvenience trying to get around and actually click on them. Some of them don't even use real links. They use, I don't mean to get technically, but like a JavaScript-based link. So a coded link that's basically not natural how you would do that in a browser. And then it now becomes impossible for me to click on that. So there's cookie banners, chat widgets. Chat's becoming a huge thing in public sector to try and service constituents, we call it, faster. But there's not that many I've seen chat widgets out there that are accessible. And I'm tangenting onto another conversation as such, but to bring back to what Anne was saying, it's really strong now then that if we are going and looking to put those assets onto the website, we're actually pushing back to these companies and saying, look, I'd love to come and use your solution, but it's not accessible, so we can't. And if that organization hears that enough times, they're surely going to start doing something about that. I mean, maybe not if you're a Google or a Microsoft someone, or you're so big, maybe that's not really going to make a difference. But especially some of the mid-weight vendors, that probably would make a big difference.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it was definitely a hot topic last night. I think it's going to continue to be. So it was interesting to hear that example of putting it on the accessibility statement. For sure. I mean, one of what part I've got to ask, because it was I was hoping to get some tips, seeing as it is in the title of the webinar, so that might help. So if anybody's at this point would be willing to share any tips they might have around accessibility, anything at all. When we spoke to Claire Cryer, who is the web officer at Harrogate Borough Council, and she's done a phenomenal job, and she's all over this. And she mentioned before an accessibility day each week that she assigns. Could be take a couple of minutes, could be hours. I think it was every Friday, and she will solve any problems on the site. Now, obviously, it's people at different stages of their journeys, but when hearing other people have taken that and applied it themselves, I mean, that was a great practical tip. Is there anything like that I can throw out there and see if I can get from anybody?
Yeah, I can go if you want. I guess using the assistive technology, like screen readers or tapping through, if you use anything like that, you'll begin to see, say, if your site's not accessible. So if you want to tab through the navigation or just through a page, but you don't know where you are, then there's an issue there. So you'll need to know where you are. But things like screen readers, I know here at Jadu we use them, I guess, day to day, especially for testing. And if we've got buttons that come up with, like Lee mentioned earlier, that just say shop now, if there's places where we can put them in to say, if they're in a table, if they can read out like a unique identifier. So rather than just reading out shop now, it can read out the title as well. We'll always make sure that we can do that. But using the technology is probably the best way to get an understanding of how and why you need to write your content in a certain way, I guess. So why you need to structure everything correctly, and just use it and format it in a way that's going to work for everyone.
I think the thing I'd add on to that as well, and this is going to be strange coming from a guy who builds software that does automated accessibility checking, is automated checking isn't the sole answer. And I explain this to everyone that comes and tries to take a demo of our software and thinks this is the answer that's going to fix all of their accessibility. That's just not true. It's a compliment. It's really going to help you. But if you just look at doing things down to WCAG to the letter of the law, you're going to miss the entire user experience angle to it. It's not just about trying to comply with every guideline. We need to take a step back and ensure you are manually auditing your content. You're educating your team, allowing them some time to learn and actually use technologies like what Luke was saying, so that you can actually, they can see firsthand the problem. If they can see and understand the problem and not just some statistics on something, but truly experience it for themselves, then they may, when they come to approach writing new content, they may approach it in a different way. So just something that annoys me, which I learned as I was using it in my day-to-day life, is people that put those hamburger icons for a menu on a mobile phone in the top left-hand corner is terrible. When I've got quite a large mobile phone, if I'm walking along in the street with my one hand, because I've got my little boy in my other hand, and you've got your hamburger icon in the top, I'm trying to play a juggling game to click on that between I'm possibly going to drop my phone. So it's little things that if they can just do, if you can just help get some education and always manually check your work as well, then I think that will make a huge difference. And obviously, just to not completely bash accessibility testing, since it's what we do, but also you can't manually audit 20, 30,000 pages continuously. So that they really do go hand in hand with one another, but neither one of them is the entire solution. It's all about having your team educated.
Very, very good points. And I was wondering if you had anything. I know we're kind of relying on you because you are the person in the front line. We sort of constantly seeking your insight and inputs. Is there anything at all you could throw into the mix?
Yeah, I think so. I think we all use websites, and it's much easier to use a site that's well structured and with good colour contrast and simple, well-written content. So I think if you sort of explain that to people, and that's what you're aiming for. I mean, even if they haven't got the technology, this is technology to test out the site, I think if you explain that helps them understand what you're aiming for. And also, it's much easier to, if you're using a mobile, to read content on a mobile that's a web page than a PDF on a mobile. It's those sort of things, really. And just explaining how it opens up services. A lot of people only have a mobile, don't they? Not everybody has a computer at home, and a lot of people rely on a mobile to access services. So you're opening up the content to everybody as well by making it accessible, whatever the technology they're using.
Yeah, that's a great point, and one I think it's all too easy to forget, but it's a really important, worth reminding for sure.
I think remembering simplicity is the biggest one. We don't need to be always creating such complicated, beautiful looking pages when really it's just the content that's the most important. So just focus on what do we actually need to say, and sometimes taking that exercise of trimming some content away and getting it really concise and straight to the point what you're doing can also allow constituents to get in and out quicker and actually understand that content. I mean, reading age is a treble A requirement, so it's not necessarily to the law, the letter of the law, but we also have to remember that not everyone has been able to be perfectly educated, or sometimes English may not naturally be their first language. So if we're having really complex words in there, we could just be the constituents may not necessarily understand the content that they're reading, which then what was the point in having that in some instances in the first place? And also if you've got issues such as I don't know how to say, like other accessibility issues, we'll just say, you may not necessarily be able to understand that content. For example, let's say you just suffer from dyslexia, let's say, and if the words feel like they're moving around a fair bit and you've got really complicated words, that's not really going to help them be able to digest that content. So we just need to really look into, is that content that we're adding really needed, and can we shorten that in any way and make it more concise?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely support that, certainly from my experience working with content strategy and things like that. Simple content's accessible content at the end of the day. And it does take a bigger time investment to make content simpler. It's a bit like the old joke that, sorry, I had to write you such a long letter, I didn't have time to write a short one. But having that investment would pay off in the long run in terms of ensuring your site's accessible. But that then has the knock-on effect that it will also help users generally across your website to make it much more usable, and hopefully increase take-up on things like channel shift, as well as helping you meet your accessibility requirements, I think.
Yeah.
Right. I think I'm going to move us on to the Q&A section to keep us loosely on time, if that's okay with everyone. I think there are quite a few questions about PDFs, but I'm going to start one actually that's one for Anne, and it was a question from Holly, and it's just saying, just wondering how many people and you have in your website team at Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council.
There's two of us, and then we get support from our developer, and we get support from another member of the communications team. But we also have Devolved Publishing, so we have a few editors across the council who publish content, and then it comes to us to check.
Great, thank you. I think that hopefully should have answered the question. What are the panel's thoughts on using PDFs for huge, lengthy policy documents, etc.?
Unless there's a legal reason that you really have to do that, I really don't think we should, unless it's, as someone pointed out, we're requiring physical signatures and that kind of stuff for these documents. Then why not have that as a HTML page on your website that can benefit from search to allow people to get to that content quicker? I mean, isn't that the point of why we're putting these together, to allow people to digest and get to that content easily? So my stance is, unless there's a legal reason why you have to, or you require signatures, that kind of stuff, then honestly, that should really be content on the website.
And there's a question I'm just...
Or intranet, sorry. I just wanted to add that, because it's not always public facing that you'd want everyone seeing your internal private policy. So intranet as well.
I guess related to this, and it's a question that's quite specific, but it's a question regarding audited annual accounts for the year end of very long documents that have been signed by council auditors and leader of the council, and they want signed copies online. Going forward, we can ask for digital signatures, but what can we do for the last 2 years? That's quite a specific question, but it's a good one.
Maybe we throw Anne under the bus here. Do you have any idea?
I think we try to make it accessible. With the signature. That's a bit tricky, though, isn't it? Having signatures online. I'm not sure, how would you approach that if you want to make the signature accessible?
I mean, maybe you could go down the approach, and this is just guessing. I'd have to research a proper answer, but if you've got the PDF version of it already, then could you actually create a HTML version of that that's accessible? Maybe it doesn't have the signature at the bottom, you drop that off, but there is a link that if you want to then see that, the hard physical copy that's been signed, you can click here and get that, which can give you the best of both worlds. I'm always slightly biased and always skewed towards just don't use them, because we know how inaccessible they are, but I'm also not someone that works on the ground. So you just got to see what's the best of both worlds that you can achieve. And I think that maybe that is the answer if you've got things that have got physical signatures on. Yeah.
Would you have two versions then of the document? Because we do occasionally do that, but we try and avoid it if we can.
I mean, I'm not going to condone going and adding always like two versions. If you can always get away with one of HTML, then do that. But I'm saying if you've got things such as, physical signed documents that, what is your alternative? I would suggest where possible, creating the HTML content is the primary, but then with the link to the PDF one, if you wanted to see the signed format. And that's only really for the content over the last couple of years or historic content. Obviously, new ones trying to move towards digital signatures is better. But also to challenge that assumption is actually, before you move to digital signatures, you might want to test that those digital signatures are actually accessible. That's another point to go there. I know certain digital signature providers that we've used, they don't provide any form of, you try running screen readers out of that, and they basically use a particular style of code that it's not accessible to be able to read. So definitely look into that before you do that.
Okay, as a customer of both Jadu and Silktide, I might be throwing us under the bus here, but are there any plans to link both products so we can go straight from Silktide to the correct page in the CMS?
I mean, I can speak from our side. We are actually in discussions, and we've spoken to the correct if I'm wrong, I think it's like the head of engineering at Jadu. So we are working together to see when that can become possible. So hopefully, not too long in the future, but we'll have to get back to you on that one, I suppose.
That's the answer I was expecting. So thank you. Okay. Can you use the same link text and same destination link several times on the same page, or is this an accessibility issue? So can you use the same link text and same destination link several times on the same page, or is this an accessibility issue?
I'm not sure that I'd say it's an accessibility issue. We're on it being just a usability issue. I think if you have multiple links on one page all going to the same thing, even if they're using the same link text, it can be confusing for the user generally. Best practice in my mind would always be to have a single link in the page to the item. You've provided the link, then people can access it. You don't need to keep repeating the link further.
I think sometimes there is caveats to that though, because for example, like headers and footers sometimes do generally share links. I mean, there's a challenge there. Does it need to? But naturally they do. And take pagination. Sometimes to give a better user experience to the user, you may add. Sorry for anyone that's not sure. Like imagine you're looking through a list of blog posts and there's pages. So number 1, 2, 3, 4, or next. You might have those at the top and the bottom to make it so that people don't have to scroll through everything to get to it. And it's not. That isn't an accessibility issue. That's okay. But you just might, in some instances, maybe outside of pagination, header and footer, you might just want to decide, is that even really needed or not?
Can you advise on how best to provide application forms that cannot be made into an online form? In other words, where the user journey
I think we've just lost Austin.
So is that the user journey is to download and complete either by
download, complete either on computer or by hand, and then. Sorry, did I break up there?
Yeah, you did. Do you want to try reading that one?
Okay, I'll repeat the question. Can you advise on how best to provide application forms that cannot be made into an online form? So in other words, where the user journey is to download, complete either on computer or by hand, then send by email. Should they be PDFs or MS Word docs?
My question would be, why can't they be made online forms, and why should the user journey be that? I can't think of any forms that I've come across recently or in the last few years where there isn't a way that you can make it an online form. I think their facilities these days, such as electronic signatures and stuff like that, and the signature used to be, I guess, one of the reasons why we used to end up with these user journeys. So my first question would always be, well, why can't it be an online form? What's the barrier to it? A form's a form in my mind.
Yeah, I think I'd share the same thing. There's from my expertise in development, I can't see really any reason why a form that's an offline form that's been built in a PDF or Microsoft Word document couldn't be a form that's online. Sometimes there's barriers in terms of you don't have development resource or somebody can do that. Maybe that's the challenge, but naturally they can be made online. It's just figuring out the resources to be able to help you to do that. If you were choosing finally on which ones of those, I would say PDFs, but honestly that they're pretty much as bad as each other in that perspective in terms of the accessibility of it. I mean, PDFs naturally hard to make accessible. Try doing a full form flow to make accessible, then try doing that on a mobile phone. That's not going to be a great experience.
Yeah, I think I'd agree that of that list, PDF's probably the lesser evil of them.
Yeah.
But sort of more purely on the basis that PDF is much more of a universal file format. If it's a Word document, you need Word to be able to open it. If you've not got it, you won't be able to access that form. But yeah, as a rule, I would just try and avoid it and build it as an online form.
Great. And I know the answer to this one, but I'll let one of you guys take it. Does Jadu have any accessibility statement information?
Okay. We've got an accessibility statement template available on our Jadu library that's freely available for people to go in and download and customize it and do whatever they need to with it. I think, accessibility statements are, fundamental to the conversation in the way that they're a way of telling your users what you're doing about accessibility and indicating that you're taking it seriously. But if you went to jadu.net/library, there is an accessibility statement that you can access and download and use.
Great. I'm going to do a couple more questions because I know we're approaching time and I want to keep us on the hour. What we'll do though is we'll take a look at any of the remaining questions offline and hopefully link with people after if there's any remaining. But we'll do the final two at the moment just to give a bit of notice. One is, can we get a Silktide accessibility score that excludes the dreaded PDFs?
I mean, technically it's feasible to do that, but I would be reluctant to want to decide to do that. I mean, it's a different team that run the index, so I can't fully answer that. But from my standpoint, if it's been linked to and it's on your website, it technically falls under your benchmark of where you sit with accessibility from my side of things. And even though some of the accessibility items technically fall under AAA, which aren't a legal requirement, it completely depends on what we're trying to do here. Are we trying to be completely down to the letter of the law, or are we trying to actually improve accessibility? So from my side, I wouldn't recommend that we remove them, but I can always speak with the team to get a more definitive answer on that run the index.
Okay, and I think this was thrown out to other people that are on the call, but I'm going to put it out here as well. Has anybody tackled the conversation for providing a business case for hiring additional people to be able to deliver a full stack digital content team? John Day here says we're a team of two and just don't have enough hours in the day to do all the best practice things we're being told to do and know we need to do. I wonder if people have had those conversations, or whether you've seen them have them and how they've gone. I imagine it's one of those doing more with less things. And how has that been? Has anyone seen anything on that?
I suspect maybe Anne can shed some to this on the ground, but from just quickly from what Silktide has seen, speaking with a lot of customers, is naturally the boots on the ground, as we call it, have had to try to build a case where they can actually show using automated and manual testing to actually really show the more senior people in the council the the reasons why we need some more resource to improve this, and really pushing on the law, showing the state of play where the website is, and trying to get more resource to do this. One thing I will say is quite a few of them have failed, but that's one of the only things I can see that could be done to truly do that. Unless you get buy-in from the top, it's going to be quite difficult. But Anne, I'm not sure if you've got anything to add on that.
We haven't gone down that route, but the editors now in services are being trained to create documents properly. So we're hoping in time that will help resolve the issue. But we know we haven't sort of put a business case together to get additional resources to help comply with the new legislation.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're going to wrap up there. I will just put one shout out here that's on the list, and Nigel Ball asks if anybody has a definitive list of what actually must by law be signed and online, rather than being online with the original paper or digital being the official document. I know we didn't cover that in the actual panel session, but if anybody has that, please do get in touch, and we can help Nigel there if there is such a thing. It would be good to see from our point of view as well, because I don't think we have that to hand immediately.
I think, sorry, Austin, just very quickly, one thing I would mention is back when I was at Share Digital in February in Birmingham, I met someone who actually introduced me to Sculpt, SCULPT. And from things that I've looked into, it is actually a good paradigm for building content. So it may be worth if everyone having a little quick Google and looking into that. I've got no association with it, but from the things I've seen, it can be a framework to help you really challenge the thought around creating some of the content and how to structure that.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we've reached time. As I say, we'll go back and see if we missed any questions, and hopefully link up with the relevant people after the session. There will be a recording available almost instantly after this. But that's it for now. Thank you everyone for attending, and thanks to all of our panelists for taking part.
Thank you.
We'll see you all again, hopefully. Bye.